Okay, so there we go. Okay, so everybody, welcome to the McGill Effective Parenting Series 2020, Parenting in the Digital Age. I'm Adam Dubé, and tonight we have Dr. Victoria Talwar talking about social media, cyberbullying, and surfing. And our sponsors for this evening, I'd like to say on behalf of McGill's Faculty of Education and the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology, I'd like to thank our media sponsor, Montreal Families Magazine, on our new corporate sponsor for this masterclass, Addenda Capital. Their support helps us make this event free to parents and families across Canada. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Victoria Talwar.
Once upon a time, we had one screen that we were concerned about. And so we talked a lot of time about, how much TV is good for us and what violence on TV does to us and what children should watch on television. But nowadays, we don't have one screen, we have a proliferation of screens. And furthermore, those screens are mobile screens that we can take with us wherever we are. And each one of us can have a screen, or we can even have multiple screens per person. And as we have, many of us experienced recently during COVID, these screens have become even more important to our lives. And there have been many parents who have relied upon these screens to get work done at home. And also, we found that children are sort of on the screens even more than ever, especially during COVID. So now the question is, what does that mean about screen time? Is it good or is it bad? We're all being aware that perhaps too much screen time is not a good thing because it can lead to negative effects on our health physically and emotionally. But at the same time, it really is a large part of our lives. And especially during COVID, it's become an even more fundamental part of our lives. Now, we have seen in the media reports about different research that has in the past, prior to COVID, about the effects of screen time. So for instance, this is a study by Twenge and colleagues in the US. It was a very large scale study with US adolescents in grades 8 through 12. And they looked at the amount of time teens spent on electronic devices. So this includes, smartphones as well as computers. And they found that teens who spend more than 5 hours a day, so 6, 7, 8 hours a day on electronic devices, had a greater risk for depression and suicidal thoughts. They found that 48% reported at least one suicide thought, and more had symptoms of depression. And this was in comparison to teens who had a lot less screen time. So for instance, teens who spend approximately 1 hour per day during the weekdays. And as you can imagine, these teens spend a lot more time in comparison to those that had excessive screen time doing non-device activities. So these are in-person social interactions, doing sports, exercise, doing homework offline, reading print materials, books or newspapers or other print media, attending community services, religious services, things like this. And just to give you a comparison, in this group, about 28% reported at least one suicide thought. So there is research showing that there are perils with excessive screen time use. So that begs us, the question I think a lot of people ask is, what do we do? Should you limit screen time as a parent? And often the question is, well, how much screen time is okay? How much should I limit screen time? And I think this is a problem that I'm a parent too, and we all are wrestling with it even more so now with COVID and our greater even reliance on the screen times. And the answer is that it really isn't necessarily about the amount of time, especially when we get to older children and teens and adults, but it really depends on the context. What are you doing online? So this is harkening back to last week when Dr. Dubé was talking about displacement, that what we worry about is that screen time is displacing other in-person activities that are really important for our basic needs, our basic well-being. And this includes our social relationships, which are very important to our well-being. This also includes learning acquisition, practice of skills and knowledge acquisition, as well as physical activity. But it may be that what you're doing online isn't necessarily displacing these. It may actually be meeting some of our needs. For instance, a lot of children during COVID, were keeping in touch with family members like grandparents through their screens using Zoom and Skype and FaceTime. And you can imagine that keeping up with friends and interacting with loved ones and family members online is important for our social relations. And so it's not necessarily everything that you're doing online is necessarily detracting from these basic needs in our well-being. So a child who's, having a story read to them by their grandparent on Zoom is making a connection, a very important connection with their grandparent. It's good for the child, it's good for the parent. It can even be good for the child's cognitive development and their hearing language of the story, and it's part of maybe their imagination as well. Now, also, there's been increased use in using screens to aid and support our learning and knowledge acquisition, and this Adam talked about last week. And physical activity, well, this is still a concern with screen time. Not everything we do on screens necessarily precludes physical activity. We could do an exercise class or yoga, but a large part of what we do on screens does require us to be sedentary. And this can have a negative impact on our physical and mental well-being. But when we think about screen time, it's really not necessarily the same for everyone. It depends on the context. It depends on the individual and their particular context about what's happening around them, how isolated they are, for instance. But generally, research found that moderate screen use doesn't necessarily have negative effects, but it may also vary according to age. So for generally, for children under 2, no screen time other than maybe doing sort of video conferencing with, grandparents or loved ones occasionally is okay. But other than that, no screen time is generally recommended, because for these very young children, it's really important that they have interaction with the real world. This is how they learn. It supports their cognitive and social emotional development. And there's really no evidence that they really learn from screens at that age. Going forward, sort of 3 to 5 years of age, they generally, it's thought that during weekdays, an hour or less of screen time is generally recommended. And even then, it's recommended that, parents sort of sit with their children and are with them when they're on their screens to help them view and also be gatekeepers. But as you get up 6 and over, there really isn't a sense of quantity of time, because it really depends somewhat on the context of what you're doing and also your overall general context. And this has become even more so with COVID, where we are doing things like now learning online, our education is online, our work is online. Now, for a lot of teens, even before COVID, and children, they're using screens all the time. So 95% of adolescents are online. And in fact, the top sites that they're using, well, prior to COVID, the top 3 were YouTube, Snapchat, and Instagram. But sort of since February 2020, TikTok has sort of racketed up there, and it's sort of vying with the other ones in terms of teen usage. And when we think about social media, which is what teens are spending a lot of their time on their smartphones and screens on, we need to think about it in different aspects. One is privacy. Is there a perception of privacy? Is there accountability? Do we leave a digital footprint? There's also popularity. So is there social validation where there's liking and commenting and sort of increasing the sense of approval? is there persuasion? You know, how much are there it communicates perceived norms and social obligations to maintain contact or to put certain things up there or to appear a certain way. So if you think about it, Snapchat, there's expiring posts, which increases the perception of privacy, but it reduces accountability. And you also have this keeping up of streaks, of snap streaks, which increases the sense of social obligation. And sometimes you have teens expressing how, you know, they kind of get stressed by having to maintain these streaks for long periods of time. You have Instagram, which has public likes, which increases the need for approval. And you have influencers, which are suggesting sort of perceived norms of what is valued, what you should look like, how you should behave, what products you should buy. And it also encourages this sort of tendency to have curated selves. So you get teens spending loads of time going over, you know, many photographs, trying to find the perfect photo to put up there. So it's important as parents, because we've talked about screen time and our worries about too much screen time, but I talked also about sort of this basic needs that we have in terms of our social relationships. And it's important to recognize the positive side of social media, especially for youth, because they really actually really enjoy using social media in many cases. And it's because they say that it helps them stay connected to their friends. So it's really part of their peer socialization and their peer networks. They can give and receive social support on social media. They can meet new friends with shared interests. And they also can find a community and support for specific activities. They also can be more creative. They can share artwork or music. And also an important part of being a teenager is, you know, trying on different identity roles and figuring out, you know, your identity and who you are. And so you can explore and express themselves on social media. It also can raise awareness on social issues and can let them have a voice about social issues that concern them and give them a sense of belonging and a sense of empowerment that they can engage in dialogue in an active way about things that are affecting them and social issues in their world. So what do teens say about it? Well, the Pew Center for Research, this is from 2018, polled teens, and they found that overwhelmingly teens reported positive feelings about using social media. So as you can see here, 81% said they felt more connected to what's going on in their friend lives. 71% felt that they can show their creative side. At least a little bit. 69% felt more in touch with their friends' feelings, and about 68% of them say that they feel that they have people who can support them through tough times. So this is really actually important because teens are reporting feeling more connected that way. So it's an important thing for teens. So if it's important that we recognize that and understand that if we want to help them navigate this online world and this world on social media and buffer some of the negative effects. So there are potential risks in engaging online. In fact, the more you're online, the more likely, you know, the higher the likelihood you'll come across some of these risks. So that includes exposure to harmful or inappropriate content like sex, drugs, violence, etc., or people who are engaging in hate speech or have malicious intentions. It also increases the likelihood of being exposed and perpetuating unrealistic body image ideals. You know, these people are putting up, you know, these very curated selves, and it may increase the idea that this is the norm about how you should look. And as a teen, you have to look this way. It can also increase your exposure to cyberbullying. I'm going to speak more about that in just a moment. Increase exposure to excessive advertisements. There are also privacy concerns, including the collection of data about teen users. And it can interfere, importantly, it can interfere with sleep, exercise, homework, and family activities and other important face-to-face activities. So what do teens say about this? Well, The Pew Research Center did find that some teens reported having negative effects, but less than positive, the ones that were saying positive effects. So about 45% of them, as you see, said they felt at least a little overwhelmed because of all the drama that they see online. About 43% of them felt the pressure to only post content that makes them look good to others. And about 37% felt pressure to post contents that will get lots of likes and comments. And 26% said they felt worse about their own life. So for some teens, there are negative feelings and there are pressures being on social media. However, overall, teens were reporting that social media makes them feel more confident and included. So 71% said that it made them feel included, as opposed to about a quarter who said felt excluded. And 69% said it made them feel more confident, as opposed to a quarter who said it made them feel insecure. So you can see that overall, for a lot of youth, social media is a positive place for them, which is where they get support, where they feel connected. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel part of the group. But it isn't that the same for everyone. And there is about a quarter of teens that are reporting that it actually makes them feel worse about their lives. And so if we go back to, the research, like I gave you an example earlier, which suggests that, it may increase depression and higher levels of anxiety. Well, there is some evidence for this, but no evidence suggests that social media causes depression. We don't have that evidence yet. Most of the research is correlations, and also a lot of the research is cross-sectional. So it's looking at, children at different ages, as opposed to following children longitudinally, sort of, from, 12 years of age all the way up to 17 over time. And so there's a lot more longitudinal research that is starting to happen, and we may get more on this and start to understand this relationship better. But at this point, we don't have strong evidence yet that social media has a causal link to depression. It may be, for instance, that there are other factors that play a role, like sleep loss, for instance. So adolescents who are heavy users of social media can also have less sleep, which can lead to greater depression. Also, it may be that depressed adolescents are engaging online differently than others. So they may be, there's some research that suggests they engage in higher social comparison, that they're more involved in sort of passive surveillance of their social media feeds. So they're lurking, kind of looking at other people's feeds, but they're not necessarily engaging with others. So they're not necessarily getting social support on it. They're just kind of passively looking at it, comparing themselves sort of negatively to all these feeds they see on it, and sort of reinforcing that, everyone else's life is better and my life is terrible, and reinforcing feelings of isolation and loneliness. So it may be that depression may come before social media use, that there's already some depression or tendency towards depression, or maybe that social media exacerbates depression. But there'll be more research as we go on to learn what that link is. In terms of high levels of anxiety, there's research suggests that, receiving negative or no feedback, so being completely ignored from peers, can increase anxiety. Also, sometimes teens, adults can sometimes report this too, becoming aware of distressing events in other people's lives can make you feel like more anxious, because you feel like, oh, bad things are happening in life, and, more makes you feel like more likely that bad things are going to happen to you. There's also the pressure to maintain a social media presence, and this can start to feel like a burden and an obligation. And there's also FOMO, the fear of missing out, this fear that, there might be something really important happening, and so that sort of feeling that they constantly have to be on social media so they don't miss out. And, research suggests that teens are on average 6 different social media sites. So you imagine all those different feeds. I mean, adults are finding this too, with all your different feeds, trying to, get information, all these feeds coming to you. This can lead to bombardment from multiple sites, which can lead to an overload and a generalized increase in anxiety. And also recently we've heard a lot about doom scrolling, especially with COVID, the idea that people are scrolling through looking for, more bad news about COVID, more deaths, more cases, and just this sort of doom scrolling and passive looking through all that bad news that is coming through our news feeds about COVID or about the world in general can lead to generalized anxiety. Another sort of risk with being online is being exposed to cyberbullying. So cyberbullying is the use of electronic communication and social media to cause harm to another person. So it can include various behaviors like spreading false rumors, demeaning others, hurting or threatening others, or sexually harassing them. And if you see here, so this is taken from PrevNet. PrevNet is a Canadian source, and if you want to know just generally more about bullying, I encourage you to go to PrevNet. This is a site developed by researchers who research on bullying and work with community groups. There are researchers across Canada. I'm a member of this, and it works with community groups and government, and it has a lot of really good information on there that's scientific evidence based on bullying and how to prevent bullying and how to deal with bullying. So I highly recommend PrevNet if you're interested more about that. But this is data taken from PrevNet, and you can see this is the different types of cyberbullying based on victimized youth reports. And you see that sort of name calling and threats are quite common. There's also sort of spreading false rumors, posting pictures of people that are embarrassing or not nice, making fun of them with pictures and photos. There's pretending to be someone and then posting sort of offensive, sexist, racist views online, pretending to be that person, making a false profile. And there's also sexual harassment. So who are the bullies? So again, from the PrevNet data, you see that if you look here, this green is friends, and the blue here are other students. This light blue are strangers, and the gray is they don't know, so anonymous. And what you see though is that by and far the bullies are people that youth know. They are their friends or other students that are part of their peer networks or at school acquaintances. So by and large, they're actually often people that that our children know. Now, there is an overlap between cyberbullying and offline bullying, which we now call face-to-face bullying. And they both occur in the context of social relationships. They both occur in the presence of witnesses who play key roles. In actual fact, those roles, in the schoolyard, the witnesses can play a role by tacitly condoning it, by not doing anything, or even laughing if the person's calling them names, or even jumping in and sort of adding to it, becoming part of the bullying. And this can happen online too, again, by people sort of passively condoning it, or hitting likes, or even making comments. And in fact, we've done research in my research lab, which shows that as youth get older in age, they become more and more sort of desensitized to seeing these kind of things online, and they're less and less likely to view them and even sort of recognize them as potentially being cyberbullying. And youth who bully or are bullied offline are more likely to bully or be bullied online. So it kind of does translate from the offline world to the online world. So often a high youth that are bullied offline are a higher risk to be bullied online. So the person who's bullying you can kind of transfer it to being online as well. So how is cyberbullying different? Well, it used to be, if there was a bully in the schoolyard, when you left the schoolyard, you kind of could leave it behind. And when your child came into your house, you could close the doors and they were in the cocoon of your family, They were safe for a while. The bully, at least that that bully's voice wasn't to be heard. It was left in the schoolyard, and they could have a break for a period of time in the safety of your home. But now it can occur 24 hours a day, and it can come into your home with your child. There is no safe zone. It can follow them wherever they go. Furthermore, the technology can hide the bully. So the bully kind of is not always visible to them. Who is it that is being doing this? And also the victim is hidden somewhat from the bully, the pain of the victim. So for the bully, or for the, for the youth that might be saying, sort of making fun of them, they might see that person in a face-to-face interaction and see the pain and realize what they're doing is something that's causing pain. Or other people who are witnessing this bullying will look at the person and see, oh, this isn't nice, and maybe react or do something. But because that pain is hidden through the technology, it's not always clear how the person is suffering. And, as I said before, kids who witness cyberbullying often don't consider themselves as being part of the problem. In terms of the impact of cyberbullying, there are, a number of factors. So there can be physical symptoms like headaches, stomach aches. Younger children may have more bedwetting, sleep disturbance. There are also psychological effects. So there's a social isolation and loneliness, increased anxiety and depression, having lower self-esteem and self-efficacy, and having more negative peer interactions and feeling more like you don't have a support system. So these are the negative effects, but what we want to talk about is really what can we do as parents? So what can be our responses to this? So I'm using Parent's model here of responses to cyberbullying, and to talk about, so you see the 3 columns. So the first column, risks. So talking about what we can do to reduce risks and prevent potential exposure to cyberbullying, to being victimized. And then the second column is, how do we combat cyberbullying? So if cyberbullying is occurring, what kind of support can we give, instrumental support can we give as parents? And the third column is, how do we buffer the negative impact? How we can provide emotional support. So first, in terms of reducing risks, this means taking a preventative approach to reduce the risk of cyberbullying as an emerging problem. And there are sort of 2 potential protective factors as parents. The first is parental mediation, which I'm going to talk about more in the next few slides. And the second is parental warmth. And researchers found that higher levels of parental warmth, where there's a strong bond and relationship between the parent and the child, are negatively correlated with cyberbullying. Parental mediation is a way to mitigate online activities, and it can offer a buffer to the development of symptoms of anxiety and depression related to negative online exposure. And there are really 3 different ways that parents can kind of mediate these risks. The first one is co-viewing. So this is where you sit with your child while they use the internet. It's being nearby them while they use it, or even sharing online activities, doing things together online. There's not a lot of research on this. The research that's often with co-viewing has been more with television rather than sort of internet, social media. But this can be, is particularly sort of recommended for parents of younger children. You act kind of like it's the gatekeepers to some extent, in that you can find appropriate content for your children, and also sitting with them can be beneficial as you kind of help them to start to begin to understand and navigate the online world. Also, research found that for young children, like 3, 5, 6 years of age, they learn more if you're, put them on an educational kind of app. They actually learn more with their parents with them than if they're just sort of on their own. But you can imagine that this is maybe less effective with adolescents who might not appreciate their parents sitting with them while they're online or on the internet, and they may even act differently if you're sitting right up next to them. So this may not be necessarily a strategy that can always be used with teens on all sort of screen activities. The second one is restrictive mediation, which is examples of this are using parental controls, having time limits when you're online, rules about when to go online and what they're allowed to do or which websites they are allowed to visit. So this is setting sort of rules around internet usage. And the third one is instructive, or also known as active mediation. And this is about having conversations about online activity, suggesting ways to use the internet safely, explaining why some websites are appropriate while others are not, talking about what to do if they see somebody who's bothering them online. So this is sort of having a conversation and talking about how to be online, how to engage online. And so I'm just going to talk about, there's some evidence, so there's research evidence for both restrictive and active mediation. So in terms of restrictive mediation, it's been found that when parents use this, adolescents tend to spend less time online overall. So they're more likely to have more moderate use. And we also evidence that parents appear to be more aware of what their children are doing online. And just to show you some of our own research, which has found evidence of this. So this is some research I've done with my graduate students, Oksana Kavanaugh and Carissa Leduc, and we found that in terms of cyberbullying, so if you see on this graph, we asked parents what they thought their kids were doing online and what they were seeing and exposed to, and we asked also youth that, and what we found was parents who, in this light gray, they didn't use restrictive mediation. These parents, you can see it's negative because they really didn't have an accurate idea of what their youth were seeing and engaging online. Whereas parents in this darker gray did use restrictive mediation, and we found that parents who engaged in restrictive mediation had more accurate reports of the children's exposure to cyberbullying. So they were much more aware of what was actually going online, and they were much more accurate. What they thought was happening online with their teens matched up with what the teens reported. In terms of instructive mediation, research has also found that adolescents are more sort of receptive to sort of ongoing discussions and understanding that they need to maybe be careful about engaging online and thinking about what is happening online and making critical choices about online. It's also shown that there are higher rates of disclosure to parents. Our research has found that they're more likely to feel comfortable to tell parents about cyberbullying events, which is really important because sometimes teens report that they aren't always comfortable reporting to parents. And we also found that there are higher rates of critical thinking towards cyberbullying events. So if you see, we also looked at when there was sort of both restrictive and instructive mediation used by parents. And if you look at this graph where the red and the blue line, so they were using both restrictive and instructive and restrictive mediation. And what we saw was when they used both, rates of online victimization were lower when parents engaged in both types of mediation. So what can we do to combat the issue in terms of when they are experiencing cyberbullying? Well, there are different types of coping strategies that teenagers report using. So one is seeking social support. So many students will go and they'll ask, adults in their lives. They may be teachers or parents. But some teens express concern about going to parents or teachers. They express that, with parents, they're worried that they may lose privileges, like they won't be allowed to go on the internet, or their smartphone will be taken away from them if they go and tell their parents. Or they're worried that the adults, the parent, the teacher might just kind of ignore them or not really be able to help them. The other type is problem solving. So this can include things like technological coping, like deleting the bully or changing settings, or searching for advice online, or reporting to the site. It can also include cognitive reframing the situation, like for instance saying, oh, I thought to myself that whoever's doing this is not worth my time. There's also distancing and distraction, which are essentially trying to involve avoiding the issue. So they, individuals can distance themselves by disassociating from the problem. Like, I thought to myself that he or she wouldn't do something similar to me in the real world. It's only happening online and it isn't real. Or being cognitively avoidant, so focusing on something else to avoid thinking about it, so it doesn't sort of take over one's thoughts and increase one's anxiety all the time. There's also confrontation and retaliation. So confrontation, sort of talking to the bully to ask them to stop, but it can sometimes, confrontation can sort of become retaliatory, where it involves sort of backbiting or doing the same thing to the bully that is being done to them, and then you get sort of this escalating sort of cycle of cyber aggression. The most frequent strategies that are used are searching for advice online, changing contact details, confrontation, and avoiding. The least frequent strategies that youth reported using were cognitive reframing and dissociating from the problem. And research found that the most effective strategies, that is, in that the bullying sort of stopped, was technological solutions which deleted or blocked the bully, purposely avoiding those sites, and seeking social support. The least effective strategies were those that were involved retaliation, or just sort of the youth by themselves searching for advice online. In terms of buffering the negative impact, it's really important that parents be technologically adept and actively discuss how to be a good cyber citizen. So that means, how do you report negative posts and users, and kind of know a little bit about the websites and social media sites that their youth are using. Excuse me, I have someone interrupt me. Sorry about that. So, it's very hard for parents to be like at the forefront of technology. I think our kids are always at the forefront, but we can at least educate ourselves a little about that, so we can help them, because they're not always thinking about, what are the privacy settings, what are the things that we can do online. So trying to know a little bit about the technology is important as parents. Being aware of cyber safety strategies taught at school, and sort of maintaining consistency with what is being taught at school. But actually, I would say that we could go further as parents. So in our research, what teens are often saying to us, so a lot of the studies we're doing is we give vignettes of like different types of things that can happen online, and then we give examples of like how the characters in the vignettes react to that, and then ask them for evaluations of, do you think that's a good way to handle it? What are some other ways? And teens are sometimes reporting to us that they say, one teen said, for instance, at school, they give us a whole list of don'ts, but it doesn't change anything. But having examples really gets one thinking about what one can do. And that's really helpful too, about how one can do things. So what I would say is, for parents, we can kind of take it further by really having discussions with them about, how does one behave online? What are they seeing how other people are behaving online? How do we think we should behave online? What would be a good thing to do, either from experiences the youth has had online, or from things we're hearing, cases we hear of others in the media and things like that. So you can have ongoing discussions, and they can be very helpful for youth engaging in these open discussions. Other strategies that we can use is you can friend or follow your child's social media accounts. However, I would say if you're going to do this, you need to be really clear with your child, youth, are you going to be commenting on their posts? Are you going to be commenting on other people's comments? Like what, figure out a plan of how you will be, because they may not want you to be always commenting on things. So you need to take into account somewhat their need for a little bit of autonomy as well. You need to help them ensure that the privacy settings are turned on. Also, teaching them about the importance of not sharing personal information, personal contact details, where they live, emails, passwords. Also, some parents take things like they program wireless routers for specific times for internet usage. So for instance, they have the internet go off at 11 p.m. and then no one's online from 11 p.m. to like 7 a.m. the next morning. Other people can use surveillance software, things like that. I would recommend that you need to be careful about how you use these. It may be, for instance, that if you put surveillance software on right at the very beginning when you first give the smartphone to your child, that may be okay. But what you really need to be careful of is about the perception of spying on your children, that they don't perceive that you're spying on them, because that's communicating that you don't trust them. And if they've not done anything yet to be untrustworthy, that's a terrible message to be giving them, that you don't think they're trustworthy. So you need to just navigate that carefully. If they feel that you're spying on them, so that can be like you friend them, and especially if you've already been in a conflictual situation with them and suddenly now you're asking to be the friends, they may not look at that very positively. You have to be careful. If they feel that you're spying on them, they can go underground. So what they're doing online, they can start hiding it from you, concealing it from you, lying to you, finding ways around your sort of desire to monitor them. And we have to remember that no matter what, it's impossible to monitor them all the time. When they leave, go out the door, we can't monitor them every single minute they're out there. Also establishing family rules. So one thing is to establish a family media plan. So I have a link at the back of this, but that's essentially sort of thinking about your own family and your own family media usage, and thinking about also the other things that are important, like making sure that you get the teen and the people in your family are getting enough sleep, that you're doing other sort of fun exercise and other activities online, and then also what you are doing online, and developing an overall media plan that fits your family in your context. And like I said, there's a link at the end that takes you to where you can get more information on how to do that. But importantly, creating no screen time, so that you have sort of times where we're not online. So taking a tech break, having a tech curfew, and encouraging, making sure you do non-digital family activities, and maybe making them regular. So, if you suddenly are just doing it spontaneously, your team might be like, I don't want to put this phone down now. But if you may know, like, okay, every Friday night we do games night, then they're like, okay, yeah, it's, time for my family time. And they tell their friends, I'm not going to be, texting you right now, we're doing game night. But you have that as a regular thing that you do, these non-digital family activities. You can have a rule that, there are no screens on while you're having a family meal together. So that's a nice time when you're together and you're enjoying each other's company and having good food. You can just do fun things. During COVID, one thing we used to do is we put our screens down, and we would just take we put music on in the living room and start dancing around the living room for a little while. And that was just a break. It got our heebie-jeebies out, but it was also fun. And, we had laughter and we had fun doing it. And it was a joyful time. So finding sort of non-digital activities you can do together that promote, positive feelings and feelings of joy and happiness, which we all need. Also, we need to be good examples. We need to be conscious of how we use these screens. We are using these screens all the time for work and things like that, but we also have to be aware that, it can take our attention away from our social relations. And so we need to be careful and mindful about how we use it, and what are the habits that we're modeling. Are we coming in the front door, hi everyone, and then kind of on our screens right away? Are we modeling sort of taking time not to be on our screens? Are we taking our phones into our bedrooms and having them late at night? So thinking about what examples we want to set. And it's important to keep up the dialogue. This is not like having a one-time conversation and then we're done, especially as our children grow and get older, as technology changes, as more and more social media sites, I can't keep up with them, come online. We will continue having these dialogues and talking about it. The screens are not going away. They're a really integral part of our lives, hence this talk on Zoom that I'm giving today. So it's not a part of our lives that are going. So this is going to be an ongoing thing as we learn about it and we engage in conversations with it. So talking to your kids about what they're doing, start it even when they're young. Help them to learn how to behave online. We teach them how to behave face-to-face. We need to teach them also how to behave online. It's important to treat people with respect, to have tolerance for people, and to show care to others. These are things we are concerned about our children showing in face-to-face, and we can teach them to be like that online too, to treat people with respect, and also how to critically think about what they are seeing online. And you should have an ongoing dialogue about privacy, about bullying, and about inappropriate sharing as they are navigating these waters and the technology in different sites. And also, we need to be able to listen, and maybe listen non-judgmentally. Sometimes youth do things that they're embarrassed about or ashamed of that gets put online. You know, imagine someone who's, you know, put a picture of themselves or given a picture of themselves that they're kind of embarrassed that they did that, and then that picture goes viral. They may feel ashamed about it, and now they're being bullied about it, and they may be feeling shamed and lonely, and you don't want them feeling like they can't come speak to you because they feel so much shame. So creating space where they can feel that they can come and tell you even something if they feel like, you know, you'll be like, what did you do? You want them to be able to come to you. Of everyone in the world, you want them to come to you. And when they do come to you, listening to what they say, validating their feelings, and offering support to them, and helping them explore resources together. Maybe that's going to the school and talking to the school about somebody's bullying there. It may be helping them find a mental health practitioner to help them if they're dealing with anxiety, or it may be helping them find resources that can help them online, give them more information. So just to wrap up here, these are some resources that can be used. There are others, but these are good ones. So the Kids Help phone line is a really important one. A lot of youth sometimes say they just want to be able to talk to someone sort of anonymously, and the Kids Help phone line can really be a really good support for them. There's also PrevNet, which I spoke about, has partnered with Primus, and they have this pretty new cyberbullyingprimus.ca, and it has lots of information there about just parenting in the digital age in general. So this is a really, really good evidence-based site to go to. I highly recommend it. There's also Public Safety Canada, where you can get some information there as well. And then I talked about the Family Media Plan, which is recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And this site actually gives you information about there, and it has a sort of, you can kind of answer different questions to go through to help you kind of think about what you would choose and what you would do for your own plan. So, I'll end it there. We can go to questions. I just wanted to once again thank our sponsors, Addenda Capital and Montreal Families, for this series of talks. This is one of 3 talks. We have one more talk next week, which is by Dr. Jeffrey Daravinsky, which is Youth Gaming, How Much is Too Much. So I'm sure a lot of you may find that of interest. I know I will be watching it. And if you are able and interested, you can make donations to the department to help us in our efforts to support students working outreach activities with students and schools and teachers, and also at mental health settings to support student well-being And you can do that at www.alumnimcgill.ca, give effective parenting. So if there are questions, I can take some of those. So let me see. Anyone has questions?
This is Adam here. Can you see the previous chat history? I wasn't quite sure as co-host if you can see it or if only I can see them, because there's a bunch of chats in there. Can you see anything in the chat history?
I can see, oh, I just saw a question pop up now. What would you suggest if your teen does not want to participate in any family activities anymore, 15 age, and are not interested to talk with parents? Yes, a problem that we have. So, I mean, I think the thing is, you know, you have to keep sort of gently knocking at that door, you know, by not necessarily forcing them to be part of, but keep on, you know, inviting them so that they feel included. There may be a period of time where they're like, no, I'm not going to be part of this. But you might find that they come back to you with that. But the main thing is if they are keeping the lines of communication open so that you're available. And if, you know, you have to also monitor, are you seeing negative signs happening? Are there signs that make you concerned about their behavior? Or maybe they're just going through a phase that, you know, they're kind of in their own world and there isn't anything, you're not seeing like that there's adverse effects happening. You haven't seen a change in their moods or necessarily a negative impact on their schooling or their sleep patterns. So you have to see, you know, is it having a negative impact on them? But just keep, you know, gently being there and being available to them. It's really important that you still are as active in their lives as you can be, because you have to be the, you know, the insistent voice in many ways. It's really important that parents are playing a role. Many teenagers want to, you know, they want to distance themselves as part of being a teenage life. But if they know that you're available, even though they may not always show it, that's important, because if they do run into trouble, you need them to be able to know they can come to you. I'm just looking, sorry. What about effective modeling by parents re-screen time? Yes, that's really quite important. And I think, you know, being a parent, I think is a lot of times is about, at least I find I often am really rethinking, okay, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And what of that is, you know, thinking about how we use the screens and what we're modeling. So I remember realizing that, you know, I need to maybe put my phone away for periods. So I actually put my phone away in the drawer. I do the school pickup, I come home, my phone goes in the drawer for several hours while we're at home, and there's homework and there's dinner and there's everything until after bedtime. I kind of keep it away because I realized that it was just there and I would just pick it up sometimes. So I kind of did that myself because I was like, I need to give concentrated time where I'm just engaged with them, because I thought, you know, I would be upset if they were always looking on their phone when I was talking to them. So I don't want to be doing that too. And I found that the phone just being out there, sometimes you could inadvertently pick it up. So, and I also stopped, I was taking my phone into my bedroom, I realized, and I don't want to model that. And I realized the only reason I was really taking it into my bedroom was I used the alarm. So I bought myself an old-fashioned alarm clock. So I wouldn't take it into my bedroom. But you really have to think about like what you're doing on screen time. And I think it's important for all our mental health that we sort of are mindful about how we use the screens and how much we use the screens and when we use the screens. But at the same time, understand that, you know, they are part of our lives. So it's not about getting rid of the screens completely all the time necessarily, but having periods of time when we're not using our screens, and modeling that to children is too, that it's not important for our own social validation or our own well-being that we are always on the screens. Do you recommend having different rules, time limits about different kinds of screen usage? Yes, that's something you can do, and that's where I would suggest you like looking at the family media plan. So sometimes parents do talk about and sort of set rules about that. It kind of depends on your own context, and potentially if there are certain behaviors that are more problematic than others. It kind of depends on, again, on your individual situation and context of child. There's not really like one rule that fits everybody on that. And that's why you don't actually see rules about that specifically. And, but it does mean sort of thinking it through. And that's why I would suggest you kind of developing that plan. You know, you could set rules like, you know, there's only so much time on YouTube, for instance, if you're particularly concerned about the content that may be on YouTube. So you have to also think about what are the areas that you're most concerned about and potentially deal with those. But I think also having it in the context of a conversation that alerts children and youth to why that is also can be very good, because it's good for them to understand what that is, and also to do whatever we can to start facilitating them developing judgment. I mean, they're not always going to make the right choices. We don't always make the right choices, but by educating ourselves, we make better choices, and also they can start making better choices, because you're not going to be able to police them all the time. And if they start becoming more familiar, then they're going to start also starting to become more aware and think about things critically. Oh, would you recommend teens being on their iPhones and iPads in their bedrooms? Okay, so this is an interesting one. So a lot of recommendations say no, that you should not. And there's research to show that you really shouldn't have them in your bedrooms an hour, you know, they say an hour or half an hour before you're going to bed. That being said, there was a study that came out fairly recently. I can't think of the name of the study right now, but if you Google the Association for Psychological Science, I know it's kind of on their webpage, but that found that actually they didn't find a relationship between sort of screens in the bedroom and kids' sleep patterns. Like, it didn't necessarily negatively affect kids' sleep patterns. So I think that was quite a recent study, but prior research had suggested it. So I guess the findings are a little bit mixed. What I would say is you have to look at the context of what's happening in your situation. If it's having a negative impact on their sleep, which is important, that, you know, teens are getting between 8 and 10 hours sleep, depending on the individual, then you might need to deal with it. I see there's some research, some questions about gaming. I'm not going to answer those. Next week, Dr. Daravinsky, who is an expert, a world expert on gaming and gambling, he's going to be giving a talk, and he will be much better to answer those questions for you. So somebody said, during COVID shutdown, all new friends are now online friends, no real friendships are being fostered. Is this unhealthy? Well, I think actually that's an interesting thing, that what COVID showed us is that sometimes, you know, online can actually support our social relations. So, you know, in my household too, peer friendships were being maintained online. And in our case, it was, you know, doing like Google Chats and things like that. And that was really, really important when there was no other, you know, peer interaction, to be able to have peer action that way, which prior to COVID, I absolutely would not have been like, no, you don't need to talk to them on Google Chat, you know, go outside. But it became really, really important in COVID. So I think that's why we have to think about what's happening on screen and whether it's helping maintain. Social relations are really important for humans. So we have to think, are the screens helping those social relations, and are they taking away from face-to-face time? During COVID, they weren't really taking away from face-to-face because we didn't really have the options. That being said, doesn't mean that we don't need face-to-face. I think that as COVID goes on, it shows we do hanker for still that face-to-face interaction. Face-to-face is still important. And it's sort of, you can we can have it on both online and offline, and developing that balance between it. My 9-year-old's in virtual school and just made friends with 2 kids from class. The 3 girls have been Zooming together after school, which I'm happy about for social reasons, but how much should I be monitoring these sessions? Well, that's a very, very good question. So I've been in this kind of situation myself, not recently, but yeah, I mean, I think yes, because when you're working, it's really hard to, we relied, I did too, and on COVID, and them being able to do something online and I being able to do something at the same time for a moment, but I think, I would say that, you don't need to necessarily sit and co-view with them the entire time, but at the same time, not be totally absent all of the time. So in my case, I sit here and we have another computer here, and there've been times where, I've had, someone next to me on the computer and I've had to use my headphones to talk, but I was kind of still aware of what was going on a little bit. Other times where the computer's upstairs and I'm not always aware of it. You have to, again, balance it out, because we are trying to balance our own time. I would say that you don't necessarily need to be monitoring it all the time, but also at the same time, don't be completely absent. So occasionally walking by, occasionally, stopping by to say hello, or being within hearing distance can be sometimes important. Just to know what's going on online, just to know that, there's positive interactions, that there isn't anything negative or stuff being said that you maybe want to talk to your child about. At what age should we let kids open Facebook and Instagram accounts? Well, I would say not younger than 13, really. I mean, although sometimes parents do, and they sort of create the accounts for the kids. But I would say that, holding off longer is maybe better. That being said, some people do, some people say that, if you're going to have your child on Facebook, you can create like a family account where you're all there and you're the one that created, and that gives your child exposure to that social media and how to interact it, and that you be the first person to show them how to interact on social media is what some people recommend. But I would say that, them being all by themselves on social media, they need to be over 13. That's what the sites say. And also, just because of the content and things that in privacy laws, I would recommend holding off. Yes, so one is about the importance, comment about parents being on the same page when setting time rules for internet use. Yes, so that's important. So like if you have one parent who allows, only weekend screen time, another parent who's more like weekday, it's important to have a family conversation. So that's what they talk about, a family media plan, because you need to find some sort of common ground where you as a family kind of agree to and work as together. You're more likely to be setting good examples that way. Also, you have some sort of united front as parents. Otherwise, kids find loopholes and they can squeeze through them then. So, what is a good age for kids to get their first cell phone? Or what age should kids not have their cell phones? What a good question. This is a question we all wrestle with. So, and it changes. It changes greatly. If everyone's feeling at sea, there's a good reason we're all at sea. The iPhone came in 2007 and not everyone had it then. So if you think, more people had it by about 2010, but then even not everyone, from 2010 to 2020, that's a decade here that we've had these smartphones really part of our lives. And the usage and who's had them has kind of gradually gone down and down in age, whereas now we have kids in elementary school that have these smartphones. But if you think about it, like, it's just over a decade that we've had these things in our lives. So we as parents, this is like, we're the first generation of parents that have had to parent with these. Our parents didn't have to, they dealt with the television, but they didn't have to deal with all these other phones. So we have no sort of learned or received wisdom from prior generations. And we are using these for the first time. And of course, we embrace technology, all this wonderful technology and advances, we embrace them, but then we sort of start to realize, okay, how do we work in our lives, and what are the good sides and the bad sides of it? And so adults are trying to figure that out. And so here, parents, you're trying to figure that out, and trying to figure out also your teenagers and your children who are digital natives. They are, they were born and these phones were around for many of them. So we're like, that sort of puts it in context. So getting back to this question, what is a good age? Well, it used to be like, you would just get some teenagers having them, but nobody in grade school would have them. But now you do see kids in grade school. I would say holding off for as long as you can. I don't think you can hold off. I think by the time they hit high school here in Quebec, most kids have these smartphones. So you probably are not going to hold that much farther beyond that. That being said, there are some kids in elementary school, and there are different situations that we sometimes warranted. I remember a mom saying, her kid was going to start at grade 5. She was at a local school in the community, and her kid was going to walk home. And she thought about getting a phone because she was nervous about her kid walking home from school, and it gave her a sense of security. That being said, in the past, kids walked home from school all the time, and they didn't have phones, and they were generally safe. So you have to balance it out, your sense of safety and the child's, do you think this is really important? Because, with that, yes, there's safety, they're able to call you, but then there's all these other things that they're now open to in the having these smartphones. Are you ready to open that up and deal with that? You have to think about that. That being said, there's another mother, who's a single mother. She was working, and her job made her have to leave quite early in the morning. So her child was home several hours on her own before having to walk to school in elementary school. And that mom, did get a phone, and she's, I remember talking to me and outweighing the pros and cons of it. And ultimately she felt that it was so much more peace of mind knowing that her child, they didn't have a landline, that she had a cell phone so that she could reach her, because she had to go to work and she couldn't be there. So, you have to think about your context, but whatever you try to do, remember that when you get it, you need to start that conversation right away and start educating them and teaching them how to use that. If you get at the front of this, then you will have the greater influence, at least to begin with. And that's really, really important. So I would say hold off as long as you can in a way to keep that, there are already many screens in their lives, but at some point, now by the time they're getting to be like 12, 13, 14, most of them seem to have smartphones in our sort of provincial context. Okay, so one is a question: what is an appropriate punishment for a teen who breaks family media plan, multiple Instagram accounts instead of one, and the only thing that matters to them in their life is this device? Okay, so part of that is making decisions about what punishments you will have. If are there going to be sanctions, and what those sanctions are? I would say that you need thinking of them ahead is good, but make sure they are doable sanctions that you can actually carry out, and being consistent. Whatever you decide, you know, don't, one thing that is the worst is saying, you know, if you don't do this, this is going to happen, and then nothing happens when they do it, and you're so inconsistent about it. So having sort of being consistent with whatever your rules are and firm about their rules is much better than being inconsistent. And one of the things that we often parents do, because we, you know, we are in the age of information, so we ourselves are bombarded with information, is we'll do one strategy and then we'll switch and try another strategy, and we'll kind of move around. But by developing that sort of thinking it through and developing a plan, at least then you can maintain a certain amount of consistency. And it won't mean that they're going to completely comply all the time. That's, you know, kids don't comply all the time, but at least it means you're consistent in your message and what you're doing, and you'll have more overall effect than if you're inconsistent. The other thing is, by doing a family media plan, you can also, you know, by talking in advance, you can get their input of what they think is a suitable punishment for that. Maybe it's like, you know, they will surrender their phone for a day, for instance, or it may be something else. They're going to do a certain thing, or, you know, they're going to pay their bill that month, or, you know, you can get them to kind of agree to a certain type of what they think is appropriate sanction to it, and by including them in that, you may get more likely to comply. Okay, let's see. I know we're getting close to time, so I'll try and get a few more questions in. Yeah, so this is the one about using parental controls, like programming the router to cut the internet at night. How do you react if a team refuses and says you don't trust them? Yeah, see, this is why I've always been a little bit cautious of those types of parental controls. I think if they're put in place early on, they can be more effective because they become a little bit the status quo, but they become harder as, I think, with time and age, as people get used to, you know, just having internet access. I think that I know in some other research I do, you know, looking at children's disclosures and their sort of lying and concealing behavior, that there's research that clearly shows when youth feel that they are trusted, their parents see them as trustworthy, and they feel like they're trusted, they are more likely to be compliant and more likely to recognize the authority of their parent to sort of set rules. When they feel that they are not trusted, there becomes this kind of vicious cycle that can develop. They're like, well, you don't trust me anyhow, so I'm going to just do what I want and to you kind of thing. And then you get this negative cycle happening. So I would say that it may be that type of strategy ends up backfiring and may not be an effective strategy. Sometimes when the genie's out of the bottle already, it's hard to put it back in. So I think it's more likely that you would have to try other strategies about, you know, trying to engage them in a conversation, more sort of instructive type of mediation strategies in those cases. And you may be able, through those conversations, to develop some sort of agreement on what is a healthy, you know, plan that they can sort of engage in. Okay, we're coming up to time. So I think I'll stop there. I know there are a lot of questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone, but we'll stop there at 8:15. And I want to thank everyone from coming, and I hope you'll join us next week for Dr. Daravinsky's talk on youth gaming and talking about how much is too much. So thank you, everyone, and good night.